Welcome, everyone. I, Councilmember Michelle, call the October 14th, 2025 City Council Mobility and Infrastructure Committee to order. With me tonight is Councilmember Ray, and Councilmember Joe, who's the actual chair of this committee, is unfortunately stuck in traffic and will be here as soon as he possibly can. So we're going to start with public comment, and there are multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting, but let me check with the clerk and see if there is anyone. Let me check with the clerk again, see if there is anyone who wants to make public comment at the beginning of the meeting.
No, Chair, not at this time.
All right, thank you. And no one in the audience? Okay, thank you. So I think we'll wait until later opportunities for public comment to read the procedures for that. So we have two items tonight. The first one is COM 0167, Intelligent Transportation System Plan Update. And following that will be COM 0181, Sustainable Building and Infrastructure Policy Update. So we'll start with the first item, and that is going to be presented by John Mortensen, Transportation Engineering Manager, briefly after we adopt the minutes. Sorry, John. So, Councilmember Ray, do you have any objections to approving the minutes? All right, the minutes are approved then. All right, thank you, and go ahead, John.
Good evening, committee members. I'm John Mortensen, Transportation Engineering Manager, here tonight to give you an update on the city's work regarding ITS. And give me just a minute, I will share my screen. The purpose of tonight's item is to update the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee about the progress that the administration has made implementing the Intelligent Transportation System, or ITS, plan, and what the administration will be doing next regarding ITS. The ITS plan was approved by the City Council just over 2 years ago, and within the ITS plan is a mission to improve safety, health, security, and movement of goods, services, and people for all modes of transportation of the transportation network by using advanced technologies, establishing agency coordination, maximizing existing system capacity and infrastructure, and providing real-time traveler information. Within the ITS plan are 6 goals to support this mission. The first goal is to improve safety. The next one is to improve the efficiency and sustainability of the system. Number 3 is to provide traveler information and help inform route and mode choice. Number 4 is plan and deploy cost-efficient and effective ITS technology. The 5th one is integrate city ITS efforts with our regional partners like the Washington State Department of Transportation, King County, and the City of Sammamish. And the final one is to monitor transportation improvement measures and utilize this information to improve safety and efficiency of the transportation system. As part of the ITS plan, one of the work items that was accomplished is to look at the existing conditions and limitations of the city's ITS infrastructure. And there are some things that really stood out in the ITS report. And one of them is 50% of, at the time, 50% of ITS and signal control devices had reached the end of their life and did not meet city or industry standards. The communication network had speeds that were about 10% of what is required to support the existing and proposed devices. And it also lacked redundancy. It was a system that really grew organically over time. And those field devices also lacked the ability to generate performance measurement data to a central system. And finally, current staff were spending a lot of their time and efforts being reactive, and this resulted in significant overtime costs just to keep the system functioning. And with all that information, came up with this flow chart that really shows the system as in the performed status, where, yeah, it worked, but it took a lot of work to keep it going and functioning, and wanting to move to a managed system and ideally eventually an optimized system for our traffic signals. To get there, the ITS plan looked at staffing. And I'm not going to go over all the details, but the staffing that the ITS plan recommended were positions to add as part of the current 2025 to 26 budget biennium. And other recommended changes, one has been made, which was the reclassification of a position to the senior electrician and programmer classification. That was done, but there were additional staff positions that were recommended that were either not kept as part of the city budget or added. So a transportation systems analyst, someone who would really work a lot with the performance measurement data, that position was never added. The transportation program coordinator, it was assumed that that position would be converted to an FTE from a limited term position, and that did not happen. The position expired at the end of 2024, and that the city proposed a third traffic signal technician to help with the communications network in the IT division, and ITS network administrator, a half position was recommended, and that position was not added to the city budget. However, even with not having as much staff as was proposed, the administration is working diligently to implement a lot of the ITS plan, albeit a little bit slower than originally proposed. And so I'm going to go over the work that the different divisions are working on. And I'm going to start with transportation engineering, the division that I manage. And when I hear a lot of people talking about ITS, especially council members, I really hear them describing what is adaptive signal control technology. That's technology that allows the traffic signals to adjust their signal timing in real time based on current conditions. And to support that effort, the administration is working on a feasibility study. And someone might be wondering, okay, the city wants to move to this technology. Why take the step to do a feasibility study? Why not just go full speed ahead? Well, adaptive traffic signals, it's a tool and to help with improving flow and reducing delay to the transportation network. But like any tool, we need to make sure it's the right tool, because there are conditions when adaptive traffic signals are not the right solution. So for example, a corridor that has very predictable traffic patterns would not be suitable for adaptive signals, or a corridor that's really congested, it just has more cars than it has capacity for. That wouldn't be a good candidate. They're not always, depending on the system, they're not always the best for pedestrians, so that's something we're going to look at as part of the feasibility study. And we're also going to look at how it would impact intra-mobility. I heard last night the council members really talked a lot about the importance of intra-Issaquah mobility and the importance of that, and making sure that we don't just proceed with implementing a system that would just favor commuters passing through Issaquah.
So John, can I ask
Absolutely.
Can I ask a 101 question? So, we talk about intelligent transportation systems and adaptive. And so while I was reading it, I was thinking, are those the same thing or are those two different things? And is the adaptive the more progressive technology? Are we building on what was ITS and now we're going to adaptive? Is that how it's happening? Or I wasn't quite sure if those two things were the same or not.
A good question, Deputy Council President DeMichelle. I would say describe ITS as the umbrella term that includes all the work that we're doing to implement technology with our transportation system. And so it'll cover everything that I'll talk about. The adaptive signals, that is one component underneath the umbrella of ITS.
Okay, good. And we want to acknowledge that Councilmember Joe is with us now, and thank you. Glad that you got here safely. So.
Good evening. Thank you, Deputy Council President DeMichelle.
All right.
Please go on with the presentation.
Okay. So we're going to do this feasibility study to look at adaptive signal control technologies. And it's broken out into two phases. The first phase is a high-level screening with big data. And when I say big data, what we are doing is we're going to get a subscription to a service that has data from connected vehicles like OnStar and also cell phone data and some other data sources, and do high-level screening on 7 corridors. And then that information will be presented to the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee in 2026. And based on the recommendations and the feedback from this committee next year, then different corridors will move on to phase 2, which is a much more detailed analysis where we'll collect traffic counts, we'll do a detailed benefit cost analysis, which is a really important step because if the city wants to take a step and implement adaptive traffic signal control and apply for a grant, doing this detailed benefit cost analysis, we'll do it using the methods that the Federal Highway Administration has. That way it'll make the project eligible for grant funding. And so that study phase 2 is scheduled for 2027. There's also a lot of other things that the Transportation Engineering Division is working on related to ITS. The next one is a traffic camera policy. This is an internal policy on how the city will utilize our cameras. And it was started by the previous traffic signal operations engineer. That person had the position until June when they decided to leave the city for other employment, and we're in the process of recruiting a new signal engineer. And once that new signal engineer is on board, I want that person to review this policy and then distribute it to different divisions and departments throughout the city to get feedback before it gets finalized. Also is a traffic signal timing policy, and this one's in progress, which when Jillian came here to talk about the Transportation Concurrency Policy Project, she worked on 2 of the items that are part of this policy, leading pedestrian interval and transit signal prioritization. And based on the feedback that the administration got, these items are scheduled to go to the council on November 10th, along with as part of the mobility action plan and the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. There's more work, though, that the administration still needs to do for our traffic signal timing policy. Once we have a new traffic signal engineer on board, one of the things they'll be working on is developing a policy for how frequent to update the timing plans. And then there's also a work item to have a high-resolution data extraction policy, and that work is really contingent upon adding the transportation systems analyst. The next project that we're working on is a memorandum of understanding with the Washington State Department of Transportation, and that is pending hiring a new traffic signal engineer. If all goes well, that is something that is scheduled for 2026. The next one is a traffic signal performance measurement pilot that was originally scheduled for next year, 2026, and it's been delayed 1 year to 27. Although this is also contingent upon the transportation systems analyst, that's the position that would be doing a lot of the work for this project. Now, so far I've been telling you about things that are taking a little longer than anticipated. There's an exception, video analytics, and this is something that, of all the things under the umbrella of ITS, this is the one I'm most excited for. And so video analytics, this is where we use cameras to record signalized intersections and detect near misses. And what I'm so excited for about this technology is it really allows us to implement countermeasures to make these locations safer before someone actually gets hurt. And for this work in 2024, we did a pilot at the intersection of East Lake Sammamish Parkway and Issaquah Falls City Road. This is one of the most, if maybe even the heaviest number of collisions for an intersection in the city. So we implemented there, and we really liked the system. And then the administration applied for a grant from the Washington State Department of Transportation, and we were successful in getting funding to expand this to 14 additional intersections. This work was originally scheduled for 2027, but the grant is now scheduled for 2026. Going with the assumption that the mobility action plan and the transportation element of the comprehensive plan will be passed as proposed without changes to the recommendations for leading pedestrian interval, the administration will begin implementing leading pedestrian interval, or LPI, in 2026. And we'll be doing it on Tier 1 pedestrian corridors. So for those people who don't read the mobility action plan and the transportation element of the comprehensive plan as part of their day jobs, our Tier 1 pedestrian corridors are the arterials and collectors. Those are the busier streets within the neighborhoods of Central Issaquah, Old Town, and the Issaquah Highlands. So these are roads like East Lake Sammamish Parkway, Gilman, Juniper, Dogwood, Park Drive, Highlands Drive, a bunch more, but those streets in those neighborhoods. And however, the first step in order to make sure that we implement LPI correctly is to make sure that all of the pedestrian push buttons are upgraded to be accessible. Pedestrians with visual impairment disabilities rely on traffic heading parallel to the same direction that they are going to know when it's safe to cross the street. And so when you have LPI, that's when the pedestrian has a 3 or 4 second head start. They don't have the noise of the parallel traffic to tell them it's safe to cross, and then they would be waiting for 3 or 4 seconds before they would cross right as traffic starts to move, and that's not safe. The accessible pedestrian push buttons, they will talk to the pedestrians. If you go to a pedestrian push button, ones that look like here in the picture on the slide, instead of the older looking ones, if you push it and you hold it in for a few seconds, it starts talking to you, and it'll tell you to wait to cross the street, and then eventually it'll tell you walk sign is on and you'll know it's safe to cross. So we'll get those, make sure those are upgraded before we implement the LPI, and then the new signal timing plans with the leading pedestrian interval in the Tier 1 corridors in those neighborhood will begin retiming those signals. The Street Operations Division is also doing a lot of work to implement the ITS plan, especially moving us from the outdated devices to current technology. And happy to report that the traffic signal controllers have been updated. The controllers, that is basically the computer for the traffic signal, and we've got those upgraded. The cabinets that enclose those computers or controllers, those are in progress of getting upgraded, and it's on target to be completed by 2029. The city is also upgrading the cameras. That is in progress and expected to be completed by the end of this year. The dynamic message signs, the existing ones, are getting upgraded. The bid was awarded last month for construction. That'll happen in 2026. And finally, the administration continues the work of upgrading and supplementing existing detection. The city has been moving away from using loops for a couple reasons. One, so I guess I should back up. The loops, those are basically wire in the ground in the pavement, and so when a car drives over it, it changes the current in the wiring and sends a message to the traffic signal cabinet that there's a car wanting to go through the intersection. Well, what we've been switching to is radar detectors. And radar detectors, they're good for bicyclists, they're good in foggy weather as opposed to like video detection, and they don't damage the pavement, so that helps the city with its long-term maintenance. And that's in progress, and that's for an annual project that we do. The Information Technology Division, they've been working on the communications network. They've got a number of projects. The IT01 is basically an inventory and map of the existing network. See what we've got. And so that is in progress. It's expected to be completed in the first quarter of 2027. Once that's completed in the second quarter of 27, the IT group is going to work on designing the implementation plan for what the city needs to do to upgrade the communications network. And then projects IT 04 through 7, and I apologize, there was an error in the presentation that I had uploaded with the agenda. It listed IT 06 twice, didn't list IT 07, but those are the projects to build in the redundancy and expand the communications network. And those are really pending completion of the design of what needs to be done. And finally, the IT group will be working on a project to reestablish the WashDOT traffic buster connection, and that'll be as part of when the fiber is extended to the Public Works campus. The timing and next steps, a lot of the different projects, I did talk about the timing on those, so I'm going to focus on the next steps for the Transportation Advisory Board and the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee. And those really revolve around the Adaptive Signal Control Feasibility Study. And next year, the administration will be going to the Transportation Advisory Board to establish the project objectives and performance metrics. And then those objectives and performance metrics will be used along with the data to make recommendations that will be presented to this committee for review. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Anyone from the committee have questions? Councilmember Ray.
I always have questions. So you talked about the adaptive signal control technology, which I think is fascinating because that was for the last X number of years that I've been talking about ITS. This is exactly what I'm looking for. What do you hope to learn from the feasibility study?
I hope to learn which corridors would be great. It's something I really I hear and feel the community wants this, and I want to make sure that it's cost effective and will provide good direction I've heard of some municipalities who have gone full speed ahead with adaptive signals without doing a feasibility study, and they've regretted it and turned off their system. So I want to be able to make an informed decision to find out where in the city this technology will improve things and where it will not, and that way we can be good stewards with the communities and the taxpayers' money.
Okay, cool. You had mentioned working with partners. You list off King County, WashDOT, and City of Sammamish. What are they doing with the ITS? And how far along in the process are they? Are they still in an exploratory phase? Or are they deployed stuff? I'm just curious kind of where, are we at the beginning of the pack or the end of the pack? Or the middle of the
That's
pack?
a great question. I do not know the answer, but I'd be happy to find out and follow up with an email to the committee.
That would be awesome. And then I have a couple of staffing questions. So are there, so you kind of went through the staffing stuff pretty quickly. So what are the positions that have been funded / approved that are vacant, and where are they in the kind of recruitment cycle?
Yeah, that would be the traffic signal operations engineer. And so just one.
Okay.
And I guess I'll look to Emily to make sure I'm not missing any. Do we have both signal techs plus Eric? Oh.
Good evening, Emily Moon, Public Works Director. John's correct. There's only one position that remained in the budget and was fully funded for the biennium, and that position is vacant at this moment. The other positions that were called out in the plan did not get included in the biennial budget, and so that's the status of those.
Don't go.
Yep.
I think I want you for the next one too.
Sure.
So can you just summarize kind of what positions did we think we needed to move the ITS forward that were not included in the current budget?
First one. Yeah. Well, it's everything that's on this page. So, but it's some positions are more important for some projects than others.
Mm-hmm.
But since we have projects in multiple divisions, and each of these positions would be supporting multiple projects, that's why you had a comprehensive package proposed.
Mm-hmm.
So as we look at the first position here that included the transportation systems analyst, that's really going to be helpful for us as we try to monitor the performance of our system and make future recommendations and be able to take the data and do something with it. So that, in my mind, that's, as we laid out that flow chart of moving from sort of the reactive to the optimized state, that's getting more to the that endpoint of optimizing our system. But it's going to help us make decisions along the way as well. Transportation program coordinator, I think you've become aware of some of the things that individual was tasked with. Worked very heavily with our planning group as well, and regionally on the programmatic aspect of our transportation services. And then the signal technician, that's at the beginning of that continuum. We continue to add infrastructure, and we will need additional support in order to maintain what we have. We have not slowed down on adding infrastructure or on our plans to repair or replace. John talked about the PED push buttons, for example. We're going to need signal techs in order to perform some of those projects. And then the network administrator half-time position is really critical for us building out the network. So again, that's kind of on the midpoint of that continuum, but we can't do anything beyond the midpoint without a little bit more help in IT, because these projects are so IT driven.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's been the barrier in filling the vacant position? Are there any barriers?
Yeah, I'll let you.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Someone described hiring a traffic signal engineer like finding a unicorn. So the barriers, it's hard to do. There's just not a lot of people who do it. It's very specialized. My theory, and this is just my theory, I have no data behind it, is that people who are drawn to that type of work are also people who are drawn to computer science and other tech fields, and that the people who would be traffic signal engineers are working for Amazon or other Microsoft doing that kind of work. That's my speculation. Oh, yes, yes. This is also the second time we've advertised it. We did the first recruitment this summer. We had a very small number of applicants, interviewed them. One of them backed out of the process. Another one wasn't the right fit at this time. Maybe in the future, that person might develop into an ideal person for this position. And so we're screening applications right now and going to be doing some interviews in November.
Cool. Last question, I promise. If I look at all this, we're going to have some things that fall under the ITS umbrella, like the accessible signal push button thingies, and possibly even reader boards. So that's cool. But if I look at kind of the larger thing, should we decide that adaptive signal control technology would make sense for us, that's like 2027, 2028 kind of time frame, best case. I'm just looking at the network timeline you laid out and assuming we need the network deployed before we can start deploying the adaptive signaling.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk through the timeline. We would do the feasibility study this year and next year for phase one. Then phase two would be in 2027. And then at that point, the city would make the go, no-go decision on the individual corridors. And then it really comes down to funding because, and it might depend on how much is wanting to get upgraded. Because if you're looking at external funding, then you're getting into a grant cycle and you're even more years out. Or if the city council were to say, hey, this is great, we love it, it's our priority, we're going to fund it ourselves, we're not going to look to external funding partners, then you could, the fastest, I would say you'd get to design in 28, and I think it would take you into 29, so you'd probably be installing it in 2030 under the most ideal fast-paced scenario.
Great, thanks, John.
Other questions?
Councilmember Ray asked all the questions that I had, so I will pass to you.
Thank you. I'd like a little more information on EN05A and EN05B alongside TR086, the video analytics pilot. You indicated that you'll be monitoring and looking at the traffic patterns in these intersections and then trying to make corrections so that we can stop or curtail accidents. Can you outline some of the things that might be solutions that would be looked at as we examine those videos?
Yes. So I'll talk a lot of hypothetical because I don't have the data with me. But let's say, for example, that we're seeing a lot of near misses between cars that are turning right and pedestrians in the crosswalk. Well, then possible countermeasures would be leading pedestrian interval. And so it might be an example of, even if we're not in a tier 1 pedestrian corridor, that we would implement it if that's what we're seeing. Of course, if we're in a tier 1, then we would. It could also mean no right on red, kind of like what we did at East Lake Sammamish Parkway and Southeast 56th. It could be that we're seeing near misses with cars turning left and cars coming the same direction as them. And so if we see that, maybe it's reevaluating, should it have a flashing yellow if it doesn't, or should it not have a flashing yellow if it does? Those are just a few examples. There's a lot more, but off the top of my head, those are two I can think of.
So would it be fair to say that we're at least going to be increasing the safety for pedestrians in that intersection and the drivers? We're going to reduce calls for EMS or fire by having that there, and potentially increasing the flow of traffic because we won't have as many accidents there. Are those at least three of the things that we could see from this project?
Yes.
Are there others that I might have missed?
Not knowing what they are, yes.
Okay.
I'm sure there are.
I'm
other
leaning on you
benefits.
as the expert, so
Yeah,
you know,
I
if
guess
there
I'll
are
go
other
with,
things,
yeah,
yes.
I'll go with one more. The city would be less exposed to lawsuits because if a pedestrian, or well, any accident at our signals, but especially when a pedestrian is struck in a crosswalk, that can be a very big liability to a public agency. So also lower legal liability.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that information. That was the only question I had. If there are others that have come up. Okay. You outlined the next steps. This will, sounds like it's going to go to TAB and then back to us later in the process. Is that, what's the timeline for that in your mind?
I don't have it in front of me, so I will follow up with an email. I want to look at the schedule that the consultant proposed for this project and make sure I give you accurate information.
Okay, that's fine. It says on there 2026. I just wanted to get a better picture if I could for our planning purposes, but the administration does a great job setting our calendar out. So thank you for all that information and your presentation tonight. And if there are no other questions, we'll move on to public comment on that particular topic. Is there anyone present in the room that would like to give public comment on this particular topic? Seeing none in the room, do we have anyone online that might be wanting to give public comment at this meeting tonight?
Not at this time, Chair.
Okay. Anyone that's watching, please remember that you can always reach out to us at council@issaquah.gov. All the emails are read and answered along the way, and feel free to stop Barb B. Michelle or Councilmember Ray on the street and engage them on these topics whenever you feel free to do so. All right, we'll move on to the next topic, which is Sustainable Building and Infrastructure Policy Update. Thank you, John, for the presentation tonight. We should do some comments on this. All right, sorry about that. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I'm really bummed. I mean, I'm really bummed about this because I think you all know that this is something that I've wanted for a long time, and I'm just seeing the timeline extend and it's disappointing. And I'm not casting aspersions or blaming anyone, but I just want to be kind of on the record of saying I'm just really fundamentally disappointed because I think this is a technology that can really move the needle, and I'm anxious to do what we can do, and I'm anxious that we get some bang for our buck, and the video thing is good, and the improved accessibility on cross signals is good, and the potential for reader boards is good, but where we really get the big bang for our buck, I really believe, is in the adaptive signaling, and so anything we can do to move this faster would be, I think, in the best interest of the city.
Councilmember Ray, there still is time to mount a write-in campaign if you'd like to continue your time on council.
I am bummed a little bit for a little bit different reason. I think following last night's discussion about the mid-buy budget and the challenges that we're facing there. And this, I certainly agree with Councilmember Ray. This is a really great project. It's one that would address many of the issues that came out in our community survey as the top issues, the flow of traffic. This is exactly what we're looking for, is this kind of creative solutions. And to see the number of personnel that are needed to carry it out under a daunting budget environment is very, very challenging here. So I do want to say I was impressed. You're down 3.5 people and you're still moving forward on many of the things, and I have to commend you for that and say, gosh, you're dedicated to this, and I really appreciate that. And we'll see what we can do budget-wise. Thanks.
And I too will add my thanks that you're doing great work with skeleton staff as Halloween approaches. And I'm on a roll tonight. I would also indicate that the video work that's going to be done, I think, is going to, as was pointed out, reduce liability for the city, increase public safety, increase the strain on our police and fire, our paramedics, and also increase the flow of traffic, as Deputy Council President DeMichelle has pointed out. All good things that we're trying to focus on as we go forward with this. And then the reader boards, of course, are going to be important for public safety in general, for traffic flow, but also as we look toward the World Cup coming here in June. I could see it as an asset for us to use to help those that are visiting our region for the first time understand our geography, our constraints, and our road constraints a little bit better as they try to make their way to festivals and games and other celebrations along the way. I also want to comment and give my appreciation to staff for taking this a little bit slow and wanting to do the feasibility studies before implementation. As was pointed out, we've had some of our neighbors start down the path, start measuring the wrong thing, or it not turning out the way they anticipated or thought it would, and having to turn it off. That to me is a waste of staff resources and capital along the way, and we do need to take the steps that are needed to make sure that we are measuring the right thing, getting the right results we want to see, tweaking it and adjusting it as we go. So I really appreciate the measured way that staff is approaching this project overall. That concludes my comments. Anything else brought up for anyone else? All right. Thank you. Then we'll move on to the next topic, which is now CM 0181, Sustainable Building and Infrastructure Policy Update. Dave Reedy, Sustainability Coordinator, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you to the members of the committee for having me here tonight to talk about our Sustainable Building and Infrastructure Policy Update. So today, my name is David Reedy. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator at the city. So today's topic is to discuss the proposed updates and changes to the existing City of Issaquah Sustainable Building and Infrastructure Policy. This policy, the expected impact is that it would be allow for the incorporation of sustainability principles into a wide range of city capital projects, transportation projects, building and facility projects, and others. Before really digging into the proposed updates, I'm going to cover a couple slides on some specific questions for the committee, as well as some staff recommendations on those questions, before I then will dig deep into kind of the proposed updates and what that means for the city. So we have three specific direction needed questions. The first of which is, should the city apply the Envision Toolkit to pilot projects, first to better understand.
David, if I could just interrupt you just for
yes.
a minute. Could you frame and outline exactly what sustainable building and infrastructure policy is, what it does, so that our audience has some context in terms of what we're talking about in advance, and then they can follow along in terms of the direction that might be needed.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to jump ahead real quick, and we'll go back to those previous slides. But so the City of Issaquah has an existing 2004 Sustainable Building and Infrastructure Policy. And what that policy does and what we're proposing today relates to incorporating sustainability principles into both building projects at the city as well as infrastructure projects. And sustainability principles cover a really wide range of topics, and that means things like managing energy use in projects, managing and reducing water consumption, thinking about where we're siting projects, thinking about how projects can actually improve air quality or improve health outcomes in buildings or because of the infrastructure projects themselves. We, as I mentioned, have an existing policy from 2004 that is a little bit out of date at this point. And updating the policy was identified both in the Sustainable Building Action Strategy of 2018 as well as the 2021 Climate Action Plan as a priority action. This policy and why we're focusing on it or talking about it today recognizes the impact of buildings and infrastructure on our natural environment and on our greenhouse gas emissions. So buildings in the city operation, the buildings that the city operates represent the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from government operations, about 48% in 2022. And then both buildings and infrastructure projects have, as we know, major impacts on both the natural system and quality of life for our residents and for our city staff. So that's a little bit of a brief background of the Sustainable Building and Infrastructure Policy. And I will also say the questions will make more sense as I dive more into the topic. Let's see how I get back. Okay, I'm gonna. Here we go.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trip you up there.
Oh, no problem. Didn't see the
There we
back
go.
button.
Thank you.
So the questions for the committee are, should the city apply the Envision Toolkit, which is used to evaluate infrastructure projects, to pilot projects first to better understand impacts, or should the policy require the immediate use of the Envision Toolkit for all infrastructure projects? The second question is, should the policy specify a certification level required for every project that uses Envision, or should the city use the pilot projects to provide more data first? And then does the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee have any other feedback on the proposed updates to the policy? The administration recommendation is that we apply the Envision Toolkit to pilot projects first to better understand the impacts and benefits before requiring all infrastructure projects at the city use the toolkit. Second, we're recommending that we do not specify a specific certification level for every project that uses Envision until more is learned through the pilot process. And then third, we are recommending seeking council adoption pending any changes requested from this committee. One other piece of detail moving into the current context and background for this policy update is that city staff worked with Cascadia Consulting in fall of 2024 and spring of 2025 to develop recommendations on options for updating the Sustainable Building and Infrastructure Policy. And Cascadia Consulting, in coordination with staff, discussed potential options with staff that would be implementing infrastructure and facilities projects. They conducted interviews with peer jurisdictions, discussed with senior leadership team, and discussed with the environmental board as well. And all of that went into two major recommendations from Cascadian Consulting that informed then the proposed updates to the policy. So the first of those recommendations is to pursue a phased approach to an updated policy. A phased approach, this recommendation recognizes that there are staff capacity questions, budgetary constraints, and training that are necessary for staff to have adequate and fully implement an expanded sustainable building and infrastructure policy. A phased approach looks like using pilot projects and phasing in requirements for city facilities and buildings, as well as infrastructure projects themselves, and then also incorporating regular evaluation to see what is working, what is not working, and making adjustments based on that. The second major recommendation is to build staff and project capacity for implementation. Again, this recognizes the need for building that staff capacity, building staff expertise, making sure staff are trained and able to implement tools like Envision and LEAD for our projects, as well as making sure that there's enough funding and support for these sustainability principles for infrastructure and building projects. And part of these recommendations recognize that most small cities like Issaquah do not have policies like this. And many larger jurisdictions that do have policies, sustainable building and infrastructure policies, have dedicated staff that get to support these policies. And so by approaching it with a phased approach and focusing on building our staff capacity at the outset is intended to help right-size a policy for the city of Issaquah. All right, so in the packet for tonight, I believe there was both a redlined and a clean copy of the proposed changes to the policy. And I did want to note that the update proposed today really focuses on an updated policy for municipal operations with the goal of addressing community-wide sustainable building through city codes such as Titles 18 and 16. And before I dig too deep into what the proposed changes are, I do want to just do a little level setting with Envision and LEAD and make sure that we're all on the same understanding of kind of what these tools that are being proposed do and can help us with. So LEAD is maybe the tool that more folks are familiar with. It is really a national and globally recognized green building certification and standard. And the idea is that it helps projects really incorporate sustainability into all aspects of building development and building projects. And that can be redevelopment of existing projects as well as new buildings as well. Envision is also a globally recognized, nationally used tool, and it's a comprehensive tool developed by the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure to help plan, design, and deliver sustainable projects of all types and sizes. And Envision is specifically developed to help address sustainability principles in projects that LEAD and other building tools do not address. So Envision was designed to help us incorporate sustainability principles into road projects, into parks projects, into water process and infrastructure projects. Envision has been around since about 2011, and LEAD has been around for longer than that as well. And then the final item I want to just mention with these two tools is when we think about the impact of this policy, again, it goes beyond just reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but it also helps us think about improving indoor air quality or outdoor air quality for our residents, thinking about how can we improve the quality of life for our residents, how can we use less resources, not just energy, but also be efficient with our water and make sure that we're using the sites that we're placing infrastructure and buildings on to the best of our ability. And that makes it both a much more holistic look at these building and infrastructure projects, and it also does add some complications into thinking about how we evaluate the use of these projects and this policy in the future. So now digging into the actual proposed policy changes. So the first is to the proposed changes recommend formalizing sustainability team support for the implementation of this policy. So this means leveraging the sustainability team to support budget development for other departments, to assist with the integration of sustainability principles into facility and infrastructure projects from the outset. Second, it tasks the sustainability team to support the identification of funding and support for staff training, both for the sustainability team, but also for departments across the city to make sure that our staff at Public Works and Parks and in administrative services are trained on the best available understanding and tools to evaluate sustainability projects for infrastructure and buildings. And then third, the policy updates sets an evaluation process and timeline. And incorporated into the policy are evaluations both in 2028 and 2031. And the goal here is to make sure that we don't go another 20 years without updating the sustainable building and infrastructure policy, as well as leveraging those evaluations to make sure that we're adjusting the policy as we go to best meet the needs of our projects and our community. Next, the old policy had many gaps when it came to what facilities were actually covered, and it was also out of date with current electric and City of Issaquah building codes. So proposed updates here for addressing one gap. There is specific language related to small facilities, which are under 5,000 square feet, that the city is either building or conducting some major retrofits to. And for small facilities, the policy encourages the use of sustainable principles in design and implementation, but does not require any new standards there. For medium-sized facilities, those that are between 5,000 and 10,000 square feet, the policy asks for aligning with LEED Platinum standards, using internal documentation with project staff, but not actually requiring certification with LEED Platinum. And that is to allow for additional flexibility for staff, as well as to reduce costs, since actually getting these certifications do have costs associated with them. And then for large facility projects, the change is to align with sustainability requirements included in the land use code, which is currently set at LEED Platinum for new buildings and major retrofits. And it does require certification. And so updating the policy in this way aligns the sustainable building and infrastructure policy with existing requirements set out in Title 18. And then I do want to note that as Council has heard in the past, there are many discussions around the future of city facilities. And so the guidance associated with this document and the requirements would likely come into play in the next 5 to 10 years, depending on what facilities projects end up moving forward. Additionally, and this goes back to a previous presentation I did on the fuel transition assessment, but we've worked in some language related to requiring electrification feasibility assessments for any replacement of fossil fuel equipment. And so in city facilities and infrastructure projects. And so what this really means is making sure that if we have equipment that uses fossil fuels, we're at the very least looking at what would it take to electrify that equipment or to use low carbon alternatives if we need to replace that equipment. And this is modeled after the Pierce County Electric First policy, which kind of set the standard for what this could look like. Digging into infrastructure-specific changes, the updates to the policy identifies Envision as the standard for evaluating our infrastructure projects. Envision as the tool to do that. And Envision, like LEED, has both multiple levels of evaluation. You can get a project that is either verified, it can be Envision certified silver, gold, or platinum, and that just changes kind of the amount of credits or points that a project gets on the Envision toolkit. Using Envision was recommended as this is a national standard and covers all sorts of infrastructure projects and covers everything from water use, energy use, land use, etc. And it does specifically focus on projects that LEED and other building certifications cannot cover. The proposed updates requires identification of a pilot project to test out how the Envision toolkit would work by the end of 2027. So that would be thinking about how we are using Envision as a pilot project over 2026 and 2027, and seeing what does that actually mean for project implementation, for project planning, for budget impacts, all those types of questions. And then additionally, the policy calls out the necessary support for staff training of the Envision tool and for the implementation of best practices for sustainability in infrastructure projects, making sure that our teams across the city are trained up on how to use these tools, as well as the best practices related to sustainability to incorporate into all phases of their projects. And then the final set of changes, these were added in coordination with our solid waste analyst at the city, Sam Tarvin. And these changes relate to our waste diversion practices for city projects. It sets diversion goals for construction and demolition projects, establishes a 3-year waste audit timeline for city facilities on a rotating basis, so we understand how we're doing on waste diversion at different city facilities. And then it also mandates waste reduction and source separation of solid waste at city facilities. And with that, I'm going to go into discussions we've had with the environmental board. So the sustainability team brought the proposed updates to this policy to the environmental board in September and October of this year. And the environmental board approved the policy changes for council committee's review and potential adoption with additional feedback. Some of that feedback included that one member of the environmental board did not recommend moving the policy forward and asked for staff to specifically strengthen the requirements related to city infrastructure projects. And that is related to identifying specific requirements for as many aspects as we can for infrastructure projects, such as requiring percent recycled material in material used for infrastructure projects, etc. Additionally, the environmental board posed 2 questions that staff and the administration incorporated into this presentation for committee members to consider in the policy review. And those are discussed in the direction needed slides. And then the environmental board requested 4 changes that were incorporated into this policy that I'll cover now. So the 4 changes that the environmental board requested that were incorporated, one was that the board members asked for clearly stated action steps for staff to implement in 2030 or 2031, and so staff have incorporated a second evaluation timeframe at that point where we can see what is working, what is not working, and adjust accordingly for this policy. The board recommended reorganizing the policy to highlight policy goals more clearly at the beginning, as well as to incorporate language noting that the city will use the policy to be a leader in sustainable project implementation. And then finally, board members recommended reorganizing the policy to highlight which sections apply specifically to buildings, which sections specifically apply to infrastructure projects, and which sections apply to both building and infrastructure projects. Next steps for this policy update. If we move forward, if the committee recommends moving this forward, we'd be bringing this to City Council in, right now we're on the schedule in November. If adopted, we'd be identifying an infrastructure project to pilot Envision with in spring of 2026, and then would be working to incorporate this policy and the sustainability principles into budget development process next year, as well as the capital improvement plan update in 2027. And then on an ongoing basis would be working to implement capital and facilities projects and incorporating sustainability principles into those projects based on LEED and based on Envision as stated in this policy. Would be testing out Envision on a pilot infrastructure project and evaluating how is that going? What works for the city? What might not work for the city? Where really do these projects fit well? And then staff would also be working to identify grant and incentive funding, making sure that we leverage as many additional resources as possible to make sure that these incorporating sustainability into these projects is feasible. And with that, I will end on the direction needed slide. Again, the three questions that staff have for the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee members is, should the city apply the Envision toolkit to pilot projects first to better understand their impacts, or should the policy require the immediate use of the Envision toolkit for all infrastructure projects? Second, should the policy specify a certification level required for every project that uses Envision? And again, those are verified silver, gold, or platinum. Or should the city use the pilot projects to provide more data first? And then third, are there any other feedbacks or proposed on the proposed updates to the policy?
Thank you for that presentation. Questions from the committee? Deputy Council President DeMichelle.
Well, and I asked a question through email, and thank you for your response in terms of what I think you covered that, what the stricter standards might possibly be. This is kind of a wider question because it several times referred to the budget development, and so maybe this is for Stacy, but what are we seeing? What's the landscape for grants availability and applications in the current environment, both the federal and the state? Are we seeing grants dry up, or does there continue to be resources for grants?
Thank you, Deputy Council President DeMichelle. Stacy Van McKinstry, Sustainability Manager. In terms of supporting generally our climate work and sustainability work, there continue to be grants at the state and regional level. Specific to this work, I don't know if we've identified any particular grants that would fund and the upgrades needed for some of these projects to, should we implement the Envision tool and the requirements that would be associated with this policy. That is part of what we would be evaluating through a pilot project. And yeah, looking actively for those grants.
And just to clarify then, in looking at it, you talk about more flexibility for the smaller projects. Is the idea that we're going to bring small buildings into the process? They're not currently in the process. This, if we adopt this new approach, we'll be bringing more buildings in to analyze what their sustainability is. Is that the...
Yeah, so the current policy that we still have from 2004, it has this gap where it doesn't address anything under 5,000 square feet.
Right.
And so what the proposed updates do there is it encourages, through sustainability support, the incorporation of sustainability principles into facility projects that are under 5,000 square feet. That is not likely to be many projects for the city. And then for projects between 5,000 and 10,000 square feet, kind of those middle-sized projects, there would be kind of more sustainable guidance and principles incorporated into projects for those size buildings, bringing it kind of up to that LEED Platinum level. But again, sticking to aligning as best we can with LEED Platinum and not requiring certification to allow for that flexibility and to cut costs with the certification. So that would, depending again on which facility projects we end up moving forward over the next 5 to 10 years, there could be some that fall into that bucket.
Great. All right. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Ray.
Thank you. I want to explore the difference between LEED and Envision for just a minute. You kind of laid out some of it, but can you talk a little bit more about LEED versus Envision and why we would want to embrace one versus the other?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So LEED is very specifically designed to support building projects. There is also LEED for cities, which this city is a LEED Gold certified city as well. So that's kind of on a community scale. But generally, the way that both LEED and Envision work is they have these large criteria checklists, essentially. And if you meet a certain threshold, if you meet a certain criteria, you get points for that part of the checklist. And so the way LEED has been developed is that the way you get points are all associated with a specific building or a set of buildings, right? And so going into everything from energy use in that facility, the siting of that building itself, resource use in the building, what materials go into that building, and it's generally not used for anything other than buildings. Envision was specifically designed to address the gap of other types of projects that might not have buildings associated with them. So I was looking this up right before this, and when it comes to transportation projects, that could include transit centers or the H-Line rapid ride expansion in King County was an Envision project, right? So it can be kind of other types of these big capital projects. It can be interchanges onto highways. It can be parks projects. And so the way those criteria are laid out in Envision and which ones you're picking are specifically designed for those types of projects as opposed to buildings. Does that help answer the question? Okay.
That's perfect. So on the Envision model, does it have a parallel structure like LEED has, various tiers of goodness?
Yes.
And are we looking at maintaining a parallel target, I guess?
Yeah, so that is one of the questions for the committee. For LEED, we have these specific targets related to LEED Platinum that we're going for. Staff are recommending that we do not set a specific target for the use of the Envision toolkit yet. And part of that goes to the point that we haven't used the Envision toolkit before for City of Issaquah projects. Generally, there are just fewer of these projects compared to LEED projects nationwide. And so rather than setting a kind of a goal or a requirement that we need to meet, the intention as written right now is to try a pilot project and see what does it take to get to that verified level or that LEED Envision Platinum level, and evaluate kind of what is feasible and makes sense for us to try and achieve through our different capital projects.
Perfect. What a great segue, because my next couple questions had to do with the pilot. And I think you answered the first one, which is what do we hope to learn? And we're trying to really tune in on what level makes sense. So yay. Thank you for answering that before I even asked it. What's the impact if we don't do a pilot?
And just jump into using the Envision toolkit. I think if we were to jump in using the Envision toolkit without a pilot project, part of the challenge there is that we don't necessarily know what the impact on our capital projects will be. If we are trying to become Envision certified for these projects, and this goes to your first question too. By piloting Envision, we're going to understand what does it really mean to use alternative materials? What does it mean if we are incorporating these sustainability principles really during the design process of a capital project? What does it mean if we're making sure that we're managing waste that comes out of the project in certain ways? And so without knowing that better at the outset and without kind of the training that goes along with lead Envision projects, we are unsure what kind of the financial implications will be, or exactly what the impact on kind of how, if that will delay capital projects and infrastructure projects or not.
Okay,
Stacey,
fair enough.
do you have anything?
I was just going to add the impact on staff capacity, and we currently don't have any staff trained in Envision, so that's something following council approval we would start rolling out so staff become prepared to test out this tool.
Right. Last question on pilot. How do we select a pilot project? Given that, I mean, kind of like this about Envision, that it's multidimensional, but that also adds complexity that, you know, a transportation project is not a parks project, is not an interchange project, is not a building project. And how do we select a pilot that gives us confidence that we can achieve what you were just outlining?
It's a great question. I think the intention in selecting a pilot project would be coordination between the sustainability department as well as the departments that are most likely to be affected by this policy. So public works and parks specifically, potentially administrative services depending on the infrastructure projects. But in discussion with those leaderships and those project managers, trying to identify which project we can maybe implement Envision at the right point for that project. And so discussing where projects are at, where there might be the best opportunities to see kind of the breadth of what Envision can do for these infrastructure projects as well. And so those conversations we would expect to have in early 2026, and in coordination with that leadership and project teams, identify at least one, maybe additional projects that we want to test it out on. And there would be nothing to stop us from trying to work with two different types of projects to see how it rolls out on different types of infrastructure projects.
So possibly multiple pilots.
It could be multiple
Yeah.
pilots.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I'm good.
Deputy President Michelle.
Just one more question. So on the next steps, it says full city council policy review in November of 2025. But it doesn't say adoption. So will we be voting on it in November? Or will we just be reviewing the policy?
Do you want to jump in on that?
I think
or?
I see
Sorry.
Deputy Administrator. Yeah.
I can jump in. We would be looking at a council adoption.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you for the presentation. I had a question about the diversion goal for construction and demolition waste. Can you remind me if we are, it's a 75% waste diversion for construction projects and 90% diversion for construction projects with demolition, as well as encouraging salvage and deconstruction assessments. Do those numbers line up or align with the goals we have for residential waste as well? I can't remember they sound similar, but I can't remember if they're the same. And if so, is there a reason that they are aligning?
I can follow up with the council committee on that with after checking in with our solid waste analyst. They do roughly align with our community-wide material waste diversion goals as well, but I'll check in with Sam to see if there's any other specific information that went into those numbers.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. I was trying to kind of thinking out loud whether or not those 75 and 90 are kind of magic numbers for the environmental community or our ICAP plan, our climate plan as well. So I was just curious if that could be followed up on.
Yes.
when we look at the pilot projects, the administration's recommending that we do a pilot project on these rather than making Envision required for everything. Councilmember Ray indicated that there might be, when you answered his question, there might be multiple projects that we would be looking at. Is there a top number that we would kind of cap it at? In other words, when does the pilot stop, I guess?
That is a great question. And I currently, the way the policy updates are written, we'd be implementing pilot project or pilot projects over 2026 and 2027. Then in 2028, would be evaluating how those pilot projects have gone, and then either recommending changes to the policy or thinking about how we might want to update the policy at that point. We have not set kind of an upper limit on the number of pilot projects, but I think that number would be determined based on staff capacity and project capacity to take on the extra work of evaluating a project against Envision. I imagine it wouldn't be very many projects.
I would just like to add, we also want to make sure that we're using a pilot project on different types of infrastructure that we build, so we can understand impacts for different types of road projects versus water quality projects. And so, because it may be different as we look at what this means for those. So we want to have a variety of projects to be able to use as pilots, so that we can learn what this really looks like should we apply Envision to every project, and at what standard we want to do that.
Now, thank you for that perspective. Appreciate that. Those are the questions that I had. If there are no other questions from the committee, we'll open it up to public comment. There's no one in the room at this time for public comment. I'll look to our clerk to see if there are any members of the public online that might want to comment.
Not at this time, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Again, if members of the public want to comment on this topic or any other topic, they're encouraged to reach out to us via email at Issaquah, council@issaquah.gov. Thank you. Well, that then takes us to discussion of this particular topic and the three questions that have been posed for us this evening. So, Deputy Council President Michelle is going to go first because I feel like she should go first.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you for the thorough, documentation that you provided. And I really love it when we get a red line and then we can look at that. And so thank you so much. So the first question, should the city apply the Envision Toolkit to pilot projects first? Absolutely. I think we just said that with the previous group that was presenting to us, that the pilot really gives us a lot of information and data about how we can incorporate it throughout the organization later on. So yes to that. Should the policy specify a certification level or not? And I would agree with the staff recommendation there as well. Let's gather the data and then we can set that. And I think really this suggested change is very sensitive to those smaller buildings where they may not have the money to, aim for a high certification, but we're bringing them on board and they're doing something rather than nothing. And I think that's really good. Do I have any other feedback? The only feedback I would give you is, I think it's really always important when we get input from a board that we go back to that board and say, you affected policy and the council approved that and you made a difference. And in this particular case, they did make a difference in both the recommendation and the actual wording of the proposal. So I'd really like to see that loop closed with them. And I know I had something else to say, but I will turn it over to my fellow council members and see if I can remember what the last point was. Oh, I know what it was. The reason I asked the question about whether we were reviewing or adopting is I think this could go on the consent agenda. So that would be my final comment on that. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Ray.
Thanks. So on question number one about piloting, I have to tell you, coming into this meeting, I was not really a big fan of piloting. And because it's like, let's just get on with it. We take too long for everything we do anyway. Let's get going. But you convinced me, so hooray for you. But seriously, I know I think piloting is the way to go. On question number two, I'm going to suggest a hybrid, which is should the policy specify a certification level or should we wait for the pilot? Maybe it's both. Maybe we set what we think the target should be, and then we use the pilot as an opportunity to true that up. If we say, we think it should be platinum, but once we did the pilot, we think it should be platinum plus or, platinum minus, whatever makes sense. But let's set a target because I don't want to get into a situation where we look like we're retreating from a particular standard we have today where we're saying we're a lead, platinum, and now we're we don't know. So set the target there and then true it up afterwards. I think we can do that. That's not, if it doesn't work, this body is pretty flexible in terms of being rational. So those are my thoughts on the first two questions. I have a couple of things I'd like to just suggest. Number three, which is be really clear and intentional on the pilot on what your objectives are. I think the Deputy City Administrator mentioned something about learning from the pilot. So be very specific on what you intend to learn and what you're going to evaluate. And this may vary depending upon whether you're doing a transportation project or a building project or a parks project, what have you. So I just would like to see the pilot be very structured because I've run my share of pilots that have been non-structured and then they get lost in the woods and it's not happy. And then two other thoughts that have nothing to do with what you talked about but are really important. One is communications and outreach. This touches a lot of people and a lot of people care about this stuff. We need to let the community know what we're doing and why we're doing it and what the benefit to people of Issaquah is on this. And then I bind up a little bit on not doing formal certification because formal certification has a lot of political cachet. And so don't underestimate the power of saying we built this building and it is Envision Platinum Plus certified and we are really proud of that as you cut the ribbon. So just keep that in mind that there's cost associated with the certification, but there's also value. So manage that. Other than that, I think this is great. I agree. I think we can do this on consent if we're going to do, if this is coming forward for adoption.
Thank you, Councilmember Ray. Similar to everyone else, question number one is yes. Question number two, I would agree with Councilmember Ray that perhaps because the number of projects, as you point out, is 14 to 28 per year, that if we do get a project, that we go ahead and set a standard, start it, and true it up, because we're not going to get that many chances to do those projects anyway. So we should take advantage of any ones that we do get along the way, would be my feeling. For number three, I think that Councilmember Ray is right that we need to get word out to as many different stakeholders as possible. Deputy City Administrator, if you could convey a message to Wally Bobkowitz to let the Chamber Board know about this on Friday when we meet with them. That'll give them some early notice, and they can spread that to any of their members who might be doing remodels or any new businesses who might be coming into town, to give them an opportunity to show their green stripes, so to speak, along the way. So that's one way that we can perhaps get the word out as early as possible. But I'm sure you have a number of stakeholders that you have listed that you want to get that word out to as well. And as soon as this gets approved, I think that would be very wise to do so that we can get as many projects encouraged to try this out as possible. So that concludes my comments on that. Anything else from the committee? Okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. And Stacy McKinstry, I want to extend a special thanks to you for your work on the Board of Directors for FISH And thank you for fine work during Salmon Days and Salmon on Sunset. You at Fish do a mighty amount of work with a small number of people, and thank you very much. If there's no other business before the committee, we will be adjourned.